Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. If you're a fan of bestsellers like Catch of the Day, Pack Up the Moon, and Now That You Mention It, you'll want to be here tonight because we're joined by contemporary romance pioneer Kristan Higgins. Kristan, thank you so much for being on the show and taking out the time to be with us. Trips back to the childhood bookshelf are always entertaining on the show. Please take us back to yours and a few of the first authors that really enchanted you with reading.
I was a, a really lucky child in that we lived in a beautiful house out in the woods with nobody around. It was, very much like living in a summer camp in the Adirondacks or something. And I had a horse and dogs. But I was also kind of a lonely child. I have a brother and a sister. We didn't have a neighborhood to play with kids. So we were alone a lot. We were free range kids, out the door after breakfast and don't bother mom until supper time. And so books were my friends. I read constantly, and I was like the only kid who would get paler in the summer because I'd go down cellar where it was cool to read my books. And oh, sorry about that. And that's all I needed was a book. I'd
Could I
sit on
stop
my,
you just to repeat that? Where would you go to read? You said you go down cellar?
I would go down cellar, like, I don't know, an earthworm returning to the lair.
Okay.
And I would sit in like a folding chair in the cellar with the fluorescent light on because it was cool. Nobody knew where I was, and I could read in peace. And in so many ways, I'm exactly that person today. Just leave me alone while I read my book, and I'll be happy.
By the smile on your face, it's clear books have always taken you to a happy place. Was it like that back as a kid?
I mean, like most little girls, I read all the Little House on the Prairie books. I read uh, the Mother West Wind books by Thornton Wilder, Misty of Shincoteague, because I loved horses, all the Walter Farley books with the Black Stallion. And,
Oh, hold on, we have a freeze. Are you there? Shoot.
can you hear me?
Yeah, the freeze just froze after you said Black Stallion books.
Oh, okay,
You mind picking up from there? I'll try not to do that. It's just for the editing purposes.
sure. So as I got a little bit older, like 11, 12, I started reading adult novels, not realizing that maybe I wasn't ready for something like To Kill a Mockingbird, Um, but but books were my life, and they continued to be, through high school. I loved to read for fun after I was done with my Shakespeare and James Baldwin and stuff. I loved romance novels. That's something that's been a constant in my life. And
Who
in
were some of your
college,
romance? Who were some of the romance authors?
oh, this was back in the torrid romance days. So Kathleen Woody-Wist, Johanna Lindsay, Jude Devereaux, and it was the beginning of that time in romance when women started to become more empowered. First, with their sexuality, and then becoming more of partners rather than, wives or arm candy or that kind of thing. And so they were really, really inspiring. All the contemporaries, the women had interesting jobs and careers, and the men were, manly and knew what they want, and they wanted her. So those were always my reward books for reading, The Mayor of Casterbridge and Heart of Darkness. You needed something a little light
Okay.
after that.
Once you got to college, like so many authors we've talked to on the show, did you already have a distinct path you were heading down to be an author, or was it more of a happy accident?
I did not want to become a writer. I was going to be a pediatric surgeon. And so that's going really poorly. Aside from band-aiding my own children, I've failed on that front. But I went into college as a pre-med major, fully intending, 4 years of that and 4 years of med school. And within my first semester, I had changed majors, and I just thought, I can't pass these classes. I don't have that kind of science geek brain. Um, and uh, my first job out of college was as a writer. I did copywriting for a little company that did brochures for colleges and schools. And so I'd write about the beautiful campus and how inspiring the faculty was. And then I moved into advertising, which is basically fiction writing, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and and then I had my daughter. And I was 30 when she was born, and then shortly thereafter I had my son. And I loved, being home with them and everything. But I still lived in a very rural area, still kind of like a little bit lonely. I had my husband, but he was working two jobs. He's a firefighter, so that's what they do. They work two jobs. And for me, those the quiet times when my kids were napping, or God bless them, they went to bed at like 6:45 every night. So for me, my company was often fictional characters, and then I started thinking like, oh, I really liked that book up until this point. I would have done it differently. um, I would have changed the ending here or made this character a little nicer or something like that. And so when my son was about 3, and I thought, maybe I could keep staying home with the kids and being the primary caregiver, and I could make a little extra money rather than going back to work. I could write a book. I've read books, so how hard can it be? And the answer is it's very hard. um, the transition from reader to author it's a big leap. Um, so I decided that I would write a romantic comedy. I would write it in a small town like the one I lived in, and I would make the character very relatable and down to earth. Somebody like me, my sister, my friends. Not someone who was incredibly gifted, or like a diamond heiress or the president. I just wanted someone ordinary that would live in your neighborhood. And much to my surprise, that book got picked up by an agent and sold, and that's been my career ever since.
What a wonderfully charming story. It's interesting. You and I both started our careers nearly 20 years ago when the book business was very different than it is today, but an agent was still super essential. What about for you early on in terms of getting your first manuscript into the hands of an agent and eventually a publisher? How did that all work?
I was blessed with this great combination of ignorance about the industry and also confidence. I thought, I've read thousands of books. I've studied how books are written in college. Why not me? Why can't I be an author? And and I remember thinking, I heard a statistic at the time, like 1 in 100 people who start a book will finish it, and 1 in 100 of those will actually get published. And then like 1 in 1,000 of those will become a bestseller. And I was like, well, all right then, like one step at a time. How can I be the 1 in 100? First, you finish the book, right? And then how can I be that 1 in 100 who gets a contract? So I wrote cold called, I guess. I wrote emails to agents who represented authors I liked. And I pitched my book to them and told them about my writing experience, that I was a copywriter and so on. And I think I sent out 20 letters in the first batch, and I got 18 rejections, and I'm still waiting to hear back from those other two. I didn't know what a slush pile was, and if your listeners don't know, it's actually a giant pile in an agent's office of an unsolicited submission, and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of them. So I kept tweaking my query letter, and this is where being a copywriter came in handy, to make it really short and really impactful. And so I sent out, the next round, and my agent said, I would love to see 3 chapters. I sent 3 chapters, and later that day she said, send me the full manuscript. And within 6 weeks, I had signed with her. So to me, having an agent is absolutely critical in your career. You can do it without, but it's so much easier if you have an agent. She took me from an unpublished housewife, basically, to a New York Times bestselling author whose books are sold in 40 countries, 45 countries, and I could not have done that on my own. I didn't want to run the business end of it.
What inspired you to set your first novel in a beach town? That became a signature of yours in series to follow.
My first My first book was set on Cape Cod, which was not Manningsport. I've always been a Mac person. And I had a big Mac that looked like, it had the big tubes and everything. And I would write when my kids were asleep or in school. And so, I signed the contract, and it took like a year and a half to get the actual book. The title it became Fools Rush In. And that was sort of decided on by the marketing department. That's something that a lot of readers don't know, is that we often don't pick our own titles. There might be something too similar, or it might be too long and clunky, or, not represent the book that well. So originally my title was Stalking Joe, because it's the story of a woman who has like gently stalked this guy she's known since high school, where she knows his habits and when he gets coffee and when he goes to the post office. And she is determined to, now that she's done with medical school and moved back to the Cape, she's determined, like, she is finally ready to get Joe Carpenter. And so it's kind of like a Bridget Jones sort of rompy book. And so I didn't know that authors got advanced copies. And one day this box shows up at my door. Nobody was home. And I opened them and I saw my book. And the first thing I always do is I smell it. You smell the ink, you smell the pages. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's my name. It's Kristan Higgins is my one and only name I've ever had. And I had dedicated that book to my late father, because he loved stories and he told great stories. And I knew he would have been so proud that his daughter became an author. And so I just stood there in the house with the book against my chest, and I thought, like, I did it, Dad, and just had a moment there. And then when my kids came home, I was like, look at Mommy's book, and there's a dog on the cover. And, I give them a copy of each, the first edition. So I signed it. So it's cute. Like, over the years, it's, my son was 5 when my first book came out, and now he's 21, but he has them all on his shelf in order.
That's definitely a special moment for any first-time author to share with their loved ones. And then within 3 years, you become a New York Times bestseller. That must have been wild.
Jake, I will say that I was a sleeper hit. I don't think there was any promotion. Debut authors now, I think, are positioned very differently than back then. And I was with Harlequin back then, before it was part of HarperCollins. And it was sort of like, we'll give you a chance. We'll give bookstores and vendors the opportunity to sell your books if they want. You'll be presented in the catalog. And they might say something like, oh, this is Kristan Higgins. She's a new author to us, and we think she's going to be great. That was my marketing and promotion plan. But the readers loved it, and that's how you become a bestseller.
And you became a word of mouth hit, basically.
That's it. That's the only way anyone becomes a bestseller, whether you're E.L. James or Stephen King. It's someone who says, oh my God, I read this book, you have to read it. And they put it in your hands. And at the time it was 2006. So I had a website, and I wasn't on Facebook because I didn't like Facebook. And, I did a newsletter every once in a while, but that was kind of it. It was definitely word of mouth. And I was lucky because my publisher wanted a book a year, which was manageable for the mother of young children at the time. And so I started, getting in the habit of writing as an author, being disciplined, sitting down, doing it. My third book was my first bestseller. My second book was Catch of the Day, which won a big award from Romance Writers of America. And that sort of put me on the map with my fellow writers in the writing community. And we're all readers first. So that was great. My third book was, this is terrible that I'm having trouble remember, Just One of the Guys, about a woman with 4 older brothers. Mm-hmm. And my fourth book was Too Good to Be True. And that was my first best-selling book. It was when ebooks really hit. Mm-hmm. And I remember the screenshot of the best-selling ebooks in the country. Number 1 was Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane. Number 2 was Too Good to Be True by me. And number 3 was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah.
And I was like, this has to be a mistake. They counted wrong. I had no idea. But yeah, that book sold really well. And then my next book hit the New York Times list, which again was crazy. My editor called me. She was on the train, and I thought she was a telemarketer, so I hung up on her.
And it-
She's like, "Hi, is this Kristan?" I'm like, "Yeah, I put me on your no-call list, please." And so she called back, and she's like, "Kristan, it's Tara, your editor. You're my new favorite New York Times bestselling author." And I was like, "Oh my God," and it's so exciting. It's that elusive dream for all authors. It's got the panache of, New York Times. That was my one and only.
The first few books are all connected by the town they're based in, Gideon's Cove, Maine. Did you intend this to be a series from the start?
Gideon's Cove, it's funny. I didn't write a series until the Blue Heron story, but I linked books. So
Tell your readers or viewers a little bit about how you've done that in earlier titles, if you don't mind.
yeah, so my second book
trick.
was set in Gideon's Cove, Maine, called Catch of the Day. And I didn't write an epilogue for that story. And my readers said, like, we love Maggie and Malone. Like, what happens to them? Can we get a little bit more? Would you ever write a sequel? And the thing about writing a sequel in a story about a relationship is that you end the first book with they're there, they made it, they're going to be happy together, they've learned and changed and grown as people during the story, and they've earned the right to this wonderful love. So to write a sequel is you have to screw something up, so you don't want to do that. What your readers really want is like a postcard from them, like, we are doing great, guess what, we had a baby. So I decided I would give my readers an epilogue by taking a secondary character from one book and making her the heroine of another, and having her go to Gideon's Cove, Maine. So those books are linked, in that we first meet Parker in The Next Best Thing, and she goes to the setting of Catch of the Day, and her book is called Somebody to Love. So they're connected. You'll see some of the same characters.
We get fan emails in wanting us to ask you, is there actually a Gideon's Cove in Maine?
I made it up, and that's a lesson I learned. My first book was set in a real town of Eastham, Mass, and another book is set on Martha's Vineyard, real island. But I've learned to fictionalize my towns based very closely on a real town, because I want the authenticity of that place. I want the sensibility. I want to know where the firehouse is. I want to know who's at the bar at 5 o'clock at night, and who's closing it down at 2. And I really want to get that feeling and that authentic flavor. So I do always visit my settings, and then I fictionalize them just in case I need to move the school from here to there, so it's closer for plot reasons. So all my fictional towns are very closely modeled on real town.
You've always been so wonderful at creating really rich and memorable characters. One of my personal favorites is a cat named Fat Mikey from The Next Best Thing. Tell us about how you create a cat or any other kind of character on the page when you're working.
The first thing I did was I gave my characters the names I didn't give my 10 children, because I only had 2 children, So I picked names that were on the list, right? And you quickly exhaust that, especially when like me, my books have maybe 65, 70 named characters. There's a lot of people in there. And so for my protagonist name, they have to be names that I would expect their parents to give them. So in one of my books, in Catch of the Day, the heroine is a twin, and her name is Margaret Christine, and her sister's name is Christine Margaret, because that was very trendy back when they would have been born. In one of my books, the heroine and her sister had very literary names, Calliope and Hester, and the mom was that kind of erudite kind of mom. That was you really, really put me through my paces, all I ever wanted. And so the name has to fit their personality, their background, their ethnicity, maybe, you know, if they're Irish or Italian, Hungarian. I want to give them names that would work for their family, because realism is really important to me. You know, I wouldn't name a 35-year-old hero Braxton, because 35 years ago, nobody was naming their kids Braxton, you know. I have to have, you know, names that I like. If someone bullied me in school, they're never going to get their name as a hero, you know. And likewise, if they bullied me in school, they will get their name in a book as a bully.
Really?
But it's, you know, the writer's revenge. I love going to name websites, you know, and Social Security Administration has a list. Like, if my character is born in 1959, then what were the names that were popular then? It's a really great resource. And I have to keep a list of characters, you know. I'll be like, what was the brother-in-law's name again? Was it David? Was it Darius? Was it, you know? So I have to keep track of that, and I have all sorts of documents for that.
I've often joked that mapping out characters in a book is like one of those FBI mob trial charts. They have the boss, the underboss, the captains, and so forth. When you're mapping out a series, who's going to fall in love with who, etc., like Blue Heron, for instance, how does that process work for you?
I wish I was organized enough to have the mafia board and the FBI strings and everything. For me, writing is I do like to plan a book as much as I can, but stuff like relationships and stuff, that's very organic, you know. Is it right for this character to have a sister? How much younger should she be? Why, you know, why are there sisters and no brothers, that kind of thing. And who gets to be important in the story, you know, like if you're going to write a big family, everybody can't be equally important. So sometimes I will be writing and I'll say, you know what, I'm just going to kill off the brother. There's no point for her to have a brother, you know, and I'll take him out. Or I'll say, if she had a sister, then, you know, they could like reflect off each other. I'm very like book smart and not visually smart. And like my husband had to set up the light that I use for these interviews. I always say like a dog could put something together faster than I could. But if I can read it, I learn it. So I'll have like the Mirabelli family, you know, and hear the parents and the children and the first wife and, you know, all that stuff, and keep it straight that way.
From the name, same like Emmeline, do they tell you from there more or less where they're going to go on the page once you start writing them?
She was a throwaway character in that Levi's the chief of police and he has some support staff, and one of them is named Emmeline. It was, for me, it was like an old lady's name, and I originally pictured her older. And originally, when I was thinking about this series, and this is something that happens to just about every author I know, you have a plan for it and then it doesn't work out. Like the characters resist you, and I know they're not real. But originally I was going to have Jack and Colleen get together, and they never do. They flirt with each other, especially Colleen, but it just wasn't right. And I was like, well, now that I've written 2 books, I've kind of dug myself into a hole, and I have to write Jack's story, but I don't know who I'm going to put him with. And so I actually looked at my list of every character in Manningsport, and I saw Emmeline, and I'm like, I barely remembered her. I went back to The Best Man, and I saw what did I say about her? And I say nothing about her age, only that she's kind of sassy mouthed towards Levi and thinks she'd make a better cop than the other person they have in the department. And I was like, Emmeline, she's like been here under my nose all along. And I knew that she lived across the green near the library because Levi walks her home one night. So I had only those 2 facts on her. And all of a sudden, like, she was my girl. Sometimes it's very organic like that. And you know, a whole history will just blossom over why does she live there, and what was her background like, and you know, what are like the demons from her past, and why would Jack go for her. And whenever I write a relationship story, I always make sure I ask two questions. Why are they perfect for each other, and why are they like toxic for each other? Because they have to be both in order for it to be interesting, I think.
You've always been such an artist at bringing life to the small town on the page. Say Manningsport as an example. Tell us a bit about that process in action.
I love writing small towns because that's where I grew up, that's where I live now. And I knew I wanted to do a series, and I wanted to base it around a family business. I had done a restaurant, I had done a bakery. So like my first two loves were taken, right? And and then I thought like maybe I could do a winery, but not like the California, very posh, billionaire kind of wineries. I wanted to do a family run thing. And so I learned that in upstate New York, there's a place called the Finger Lakes. I never knew about them before this. And they're called the Finger Lakes because they look like a finger, series of lakes all in a row. And so I went up there with my husband for a long weekend, and I was telling him my idea for the story. And we're, basically everything up there is a vineyard. And I was saying, I want this old place that's been around for generations, like post and beam, and we'd drive in past a barn, and I'm like that place. And so we stopped there, and I had contacted the Chamber of Commerce to say, I'm an author, I'm going to set a book series up here. Can you give me any hints about where to go, where to stay? And
Good
they were
tip.
really helpful. And then we were just tooling around. A lot of the towns out there are just drive-through towns, like you have the downtown and then you just keep driving to the next town. We came upon the town of Hammondsport, Maine, which is a postage stamp of a town with like 700 people in it. And it's based around a green. And I loved it. I said, this is like walking into my book to my husband. It's like, this is what I imagined. There's the bar, there's the apartment building, there's the library, it was all so perfect. And actually, a lot of readers have gone there because they want to see where Blue Heron was set, and they'll go to the vineyard that I based the Blue Heron vineyard on and visit. And the owners get such a kick when they're like, we read Kristan's book. Did you know that you're in a book? And they do. They were very wonderful to me, telling me about wine and the history of the land and how it's made, and some of the troubles and difficulties of basically being a farmer who makes wine.
That richness of detail must be so important.
Vermont is very different from Maine, and please don't get them confused. And how people spend their time, what it's like to live in this place. A lot of my characters are lifers in their towns. They've never lived anywhere else, or they've come back. And so it's not just what the place looks like, but it's what do you do for fun here, and what elements do I want to use? I want to use that building. That's a really cool building, and those lions in front of the library, and also how cold it is up here, and things like that. So it is a really important part of my research, and it's definitely the most fun to research setting. The other part of research is spent either interviewing people who have lived certain experiences or reading about it on the good old internet, buying books about subjects, really immersing myself in that. If it's an experience that I personally haven't had, I really want to get it right. And I don't always, but I think I come pretty close.
Readers agreed. By the way, how involved do your readers actually get in emailing you saying what directions they want to see a character's storyline go in, etc.?
I had only planned to do a 3-book series, and so they got 5, much to my surprise. And so I don't know that I would do that. You never say never, right? But I loved that town. I loved the family that the series centered around, but I felt like everyone was okay and happy and good, and I wanted to leave them where they were. You have to think about things like aging the characters. If it's 15 years after they first met, then they're going to have kids, teenagers maybe, things will be different. And you don't always want that as a reader. You kind of want that chrysalis, or that set an amber effect. I knew it had to do with bugs. They are exactly where you left them, just as lovely and appealing as you thought they were.
On the other hand, what about readers who write you protesting what you did with a character from a previous book? Say they wanted to see fall in love with someone else.
One of the cardinal rules of writing fiction is you never kill a dog. And I didn't know that. And in my second book, when I was still an ingenue, and my heroine has this elderly golden retriever who dies in his sleep on her bed. And I broke a lot of hearts that day, and people say, like, how could you have killed Colonel? And I'll say, like, he had a good life and he died on her bed, and, he didn't suffer, and I'm thinking, like, I'm justifying the death of a fictional dog, and in another story, All I Ever Wanted, the beloved grandfather dies also in his sleep, in his recliner, and people are just like, we loved him so much, we didn't want to lose him. But I love to write about real life, and loss is a huge part of life, and it's a tremendously formative experience for us when we experience our first major loss, whether it's like a dog or a grandparent or a parent or a sibling, how that shapes the rest of our lives and how we deal with people based on that. And it's such a beautiful, layered, complicated experience and emotion, grief, So my tagline on my books is laugh, cry, laugh again. And I feel like if you're not sobbing at some part and like crying from laughter at another part, then I haven't done my job.
Any favorite sets of characters from this series?
The idea for this book came from a real life friend of mine, an old college friend, who we met in New York after not having seen each other since graduation. And he was gay, and he didn't know it in college. And I said, really? You didn't know it? And he said, Kristan, I went to Catholic school, Catholic college. I worked at a Catholic school afterwards. And I was in love. You remember Rosemary, my girlfriend from college. I was in love with her, and we were so perfect together in every way except one. And I was like, wow, tell me more, and he said it took until he had moved to a place where, there was a openly gay population. He went from like rural New Hampshire to New York City, and he saw a gay couple walking down the street, and he's like, that looks right to me. And I thought, that's the story I want to write, is a guy who is so lovely and perfect and gay, but closeted for whatever reasons, and the fact that he truly did love Faith, our heroine, in every way except one, and that they were a couple who was meant to be. Their vineyards adjoined. Jeremy was tall and handsome. Faith had red hair and was pretty. They met in high school, and he comes out. He's sort of forced out on his wedding day to Faith by his best man, Levi, who has known right away that Jeremy was gay and always had like this side eye for Faith, like, how do you not know this, So years have passed since her dashed wedding, and she comes back. He's now the chief of police in the town, and he pulls her over, and that's how they re-meet.
I imagine the expectations specific to a series versus a standalone are more intense.
One of the things I love, because I love to write about families, is nobody has the same family. My sister and I are 15 months apart, but we had very different experiences of our parents and our brother and, school and everything. So in the first book, in Faith's book, Honor is presented as kind of this hard-ass, emotionless businesswoman who really runs the vineyard and has no room for her younger, flightier sister. Just no time for that. So in the second book, I wanted to show Honor's story and how Honor views, not not just life, but like her little sister. You know, she feels like Faith kind of got a pass as being the baby of the family, and she never got that indulgence, and she had to just like be a really good student and work really hard. And she's very happy with her place in the family, but Faith coming back kind of messes with that. And their mom died when Faith was 12 and Honor was 16, and Faith was in the car in the accident that killed their mom, and Honor was not. And like, how does that affect you? You know, Faith was very fragile, and she was there, and that was so horrible. And then you learn in the second book how Honor reacted to that accident and her sense of loss, and what she did to heal and move on. And I had always wanted to write sort of a marriage of convenience story, which is hard to pull off in a contemporary. But I loved the idea of an outsider coming to town, because Faith and Levi are townies. They've known each other since kindergarten. Tom is an expat Brit who comes to town to keep an eye on his almost stepson, he calls him. He was engaged to the woman's mother. And so they're a very unlikely pair. And then my plan was to write the brother story, Jack, and be done with the Blue Heron series. But I didn't want to write about Jack as a romantic hero, because for 2 books and an entire like year and change, he had been a brother in my mind, right? So like the thought of him kissing someone was kind of icky. Like, ew, he's not romantic, he's a brother. And then I had put in like the best friend in the first book, Colleen, runs the local pub, and her brother is the chef, and they're twins. I seem to have a thing about twins. And they were such vibrant characters that I thought, well, I don't really want to write about Jack right now, but Colleen is bugging me for a story. So that was waiting on you.
Interesting. So the characters really tell you in a way what you're going to be writing next. What is that process like when it's going down, words onto page?
I do talk out loud a lot. And, you know, my poor family, my kids were very confused children growing up, because I'd be muttering as I stirred the spaghetti sauce, or like dashing off to the computer to jot something down. I do think that to write good dialogue, you have to be a listener. And I think I am a really good listener. I'd much rather go to a party and listen to people, eavesdrop on people, ask them leading questions about themselves, than talk about myself, you know? And so, so writing dialogue there's so many parts of it. And, you know, it's what is said, what is unsaid, what you want to say, why you don't say it, you know, what you're doing with your body and your eyes and your hair while you're saying what you're not saying, or what you are saying. And so to me, it's one of the most rewarding parts of writing a book. And my books are very dialogue heavy, because I just think so much is revealed through those choices, because speaking is a choice. You know, you don't have to talk. So, and I'll write the scene, and then I will always cut it down. The shorter, the better. You know, the punchier, the better. So if you can say it in 3 words, say it in 3 words. Don't use 2 sentences. And as a reader, I get impatient when people kind of are wandering around in conversations. I think, you know, come on, this is a book. This isn't real life.
Do you ever bounce conversations like that off your family, say your teenage kids, as far as whether it sounds authentic or not?
Yeah, I do. I will run things by my kids, ask them for current terminology. They're always really impressed when I get something right. Like I'll say like, I've got tea to my daughter, and she's like, I can't believe you know that. So they were really helpful when I was writing teenage characters. There were a lot of my own kids in there. There's always like a hidden reference in my books just to my children that only my children will get. And, you know, whether it's like a facial expression, or like my son used to do these, we called them the slitty eyes of death. When he was mad, he'd just like narrow his eyes at us. I'm like, oh, there it is, the slitty eyes of death. So of course that pops up somewhere in some sulky teenager.
What about when you're creating arguments on the page? I imagine that has to sound really authentic to readers, passion and all.
I love writing fights, you know, I mean, that's just when I was a teenager reading romances, I would like skip the love scenes to get to the fights. Because like that's where the sparks fly, and that's where you say what you didn't mean to say and you blurted it out, and now you're mad and you can't take it back, and someone has to storm out of the room. And I think like it's a way of revealing more than the characters intended to reveal, and it's where some of the best dialogue comes from, and it makes another conflict that the characters will have to overcome, which is really why readers keep turning the pages. It's not because things are going so well for these two.
By the time we get to Ready for You, the final book in the series, for you as the author, were you sad to say goodbye, or were you ready to move on to a new book?
I've seen a lot of authors stick with a series for too long, and I wanted to like end while they were still really popular, and not like keep trying to squeeze out another couple, and also be honest with what I had created. You know, if I walked around the corner and there was this family that I had never mentioned with 4 unmarried brothers in this tiny little town, it would have felt really fake, you know? So I got to Connor, and I figured out too, like another character who wasn't necessarily going to be important was Jessica Dunn, who is a waitress in town and then ends up working for the Hollands at Blue Heron. And I never thought that she would be a heroine until she just kept popping up, and she was so interesting and so tough, so different from Faith and Honor, Colleen, even Em. You know, she was like the fast girl in town. She slept with a lot of guys. She had a mean nickname that she had been given in high school, Jessica Does, and Jessica Does Anyone. And again, you think like, I've made her this person who is sort of slut shamed through some of the books, and everybody except Levi. Levi knows her pretty well, but everybody has assumptions about her, and I wanted to know more about her. So I was excited to give her, you know, who she comes across as slightly of a bully in the first book, and at the end she's a big softie, love and sacrifice, and finally being able to like put herself in a position where she can accept love. So the last scene of that book to me really wraps up the Blue Heron series. It takes place in the bar in O'Rourke's, and well, that's the last scene, but there's like a fullness to it where we mention the babies from the other couples, and we're back at the little heart of the town, and everybody's good, so we can leave them.
Do you think there's a comfort your readers take in knowing that everyone winds up okay at the end of the series?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there is people ask for the story of a younger couple, a college age girl, Sarah, who's Levi's sister, and Ned, and they have this flirtation going on. But I don't want to write that age group right now. You know, a 21-year-old and a 24-year-old.
Yeah.
That's the age of my kids. Feels a little weird, you know.
I understand.
So as I said, you know, never say never. But for now, I wanted people to have that sense of completion. And so many readers say, like, I went back and I read the whole series again, and I just love it. And I'm so glad, like, that they're comfort reads, and you can go back to them and visit this little town again, and everything is just as you left it.
Your next bestseller, good luck with that, was really therapeutic for readers who'd actually gone through that scenario. Was that based on any kind of real life muse?
I wrote that book for myself because it was therapy in some way. It was like, how do you get there? How do you get there to love your imperfect self and really stop fighting it? You know, when do you give yourself a break and say, I'm good enough the way I am. I'm actually kind of great, you know, and really believe that. And so, you know, I knew it was a dangerous topic because you're not supposed to talk about people who weigh this much or who think these thoughts. And I also knew if I felt it, other people would feel it. And that I wrote each character from a place of intense love and compassion, especially Emerson, who suffers so much and just cannot get the help that she needs from the time that she's a little girl to the time that she dies. So when people, I've gotten more fan mail on this book than any other. People have said, like, this book changed my life. This is my Bible for self-acceptance. I've given it to my daughter, my mother, my sister, my aunt, my cousin, my husband, because it really does a deep dive into the things that a lot of people don't want to admit about how tough it is to get to that place where Georgia and Marley do eventually get. One of the things that I was committed to doing when I started writing was not writing the classic, beautiful, sexy heroine as a man would describe her. You know, she's got like too round of an ass and her lips are too lush and beautiful. And, you know, she's unaware of how striking she is. And, you know, like you can go on the internet and find some really hilarious descriptions of women who are basically like blow up sex dolls come to life. I did not want to do that. You know, I wanted my people to be real. And something that's very real in my life since I was, you know, literally a year old, has been weight and feeling very imperfect and, you know, struggling against the standards that are shown to us at every interval in every medium every day.
Yeah.
Whether it's at the grocery store or watching Beyonce's special or television. You see Kerry Washington, you know, you think you're constantly bombarded with these impossible ideals of beauty and size in a world that also tells you, love yourself for who you are. No one else matters. And that double messaging for me has been really hard. I think for every American woman, it's very hard to say, like, I'm completely happy in the body that I have, and I'm going to take care of it, but I'm not going to overthink it. We don't live in that society. And weight and food have just been, you know, a big struggle in my life. You know, my nickname that my godfather gave me on my first birthday was Gorgelina, because I was so fat. I was a fat little baby. And when I was 4 years old, I was the first contestant kicked out of a little Miss Doolittle Park beauty pageant because the judge told me I was too chubby. And I was 4, you know? And, you know, all the messages of life and all the inner thoughts about, like, oh, I'm going to lose weight. So when I start high school, I'll be, you know, skinnier, or for my wedding or whatever. And I really struggled with that, you know, like well into my 30s. Having a daughter really made me rethink that and make sure that my messaging was more positive. So I would like fake it till I made it, you know, with my child. You know, she'd say, "You're so pretty, mommy." I wasn't about to tell her I wasn't. And I'd say, "Thank you," you know, and tried to downplay the importance of looks. But for good luck with that, I think one of the things that we have seen in society is that fetishization, if that's a word, of morbidly obese people. You know, there's 600-pound life or 1-ton family, you know, and there are these shows that infantilize people of that size and make them, you know, like the doctor throws up his hands and is like, well, eat less. You see, like, people getting stared at in the supermarket because they're on a scooter because they're too heavy to walk through the aisles. And, you know, it's like a free-for-all of judgment. And so what I wanted to do was write a book that explored women's struggle with size and looks and self-acceptance, and have one of them fail. And so Emerson is the character who fails at that. And I think, you know, it sounds so harsh to say the woman who weighs more than 600 pounds dies from complications to her obesity, but that does happen.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at someone of that size, whether it's like clicking around on the TV or you just think, like, how did it get that far? And Emerson tells you how it gets that far.
If you only knew, I call a study of sisters because it's such a tricky interpersonal dynamic to write on the page. Tell us about how you did it so successfully.
In a lot of ways, this book is about my sister and me. We have a very deep love and devotion to each other. We always have. We've never had a period where we didn't talk. And I think like books that pit woman against woman, where like she's the evil sister and she's the nice sister, I kind of hate that, you know. I mean, they're all evil and they're all nice. We all have parts, right? And so I wanted to write a book about sisters who were very, very close, and going through something very, very different, you know. So Rachel is the mother of three triplets, and has the life she always dreamed of as a stay-at-home mom, and you know, loves making her house beautiful and taking care of her husband and kids, and then finds out that her husband is cheating on her. And that idea actually came from this random moment where I was sitting in a restaurant waiting for my friends in the little area in the front. There were benches, and this lady sat down, and she I said, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, "My husband is cheating on me."
You're kidding me.
Just like that. "My husband is cheating on me. I just found out. I always thought I would leave him, that this would be the line in the sand, but now that the moment is here, I don't know what to do." And it was so profound. Like, you know, I always say I have a tell me everything face. People love to talk to me, and I'm friendly. I will always initiate conversation on a plane or something, and, you know, ask, "Oh, why were you in San Diego?" And, you know, end up with a friend by the end of the flight. But she just blurted out like the worst moment in her life, right, to a stranger. And I thought, you know, I said all the appropriate things like, "I'm so sorry, and I you know, I hope that you get the happiness that you deserve," which I thought was a good line. I wanted to say like, "Leave him," you know? But not my call, right? I'm not the one who has, you know, little kids at the time. And I thought, like, what would you do? What would you do if you had everything at stake, not just like your pride and your marriage, but your children's home? You know, how will you have to go back to work if you don't want to, and those kind of things. And then Jenny was sort of like a fun. She had a little bit more of a fun storyline. Not dealing with infidelity, but she's been dumped by her wonderful husband. She's still like 95% in love with him, and has a complete girl crush on his new wife, who is wonderful. And again, like, I didn't want to make the evil second wife who, you know, that she's a wonderful person. Jenny can't help but like her, admire her. And so Jenny's challenge is to kind of get over her husband and make a new life for herself. And she's a wedding dress designer. I always wanted to write someone who made wedding dresses because they're such works of art. And, you know, I always want my characters to have a fun place to go to work. So, so that was a really fun, like, side note, is that
On Second Thought is another of your recent bestsellers and has a really clever inner monologue that weaves throughout the book. What was that like to write? Was that tricky, or did that come to you very naturally?
I think it is fun, and I think it's really intimate, and that's something that comes naturally to me in writing, and something that, you know, I didn't really know that I did until reviewers and readers started saying, like, it was like talking to my best friend, or I think that way, but I've never said that out loud. I can't believe you said that in a book, you know. It's like so me. And so again, two sisters, but sisters who did not, again, grow up with the same family. One has a mother, a different mom who died young, and she's sort of adopted by her father's first wife. He goes back to his first wife, and then her boyfriend breaks up with her in a very public way on a blog that goes viral. And so she has to deal with like the public shame of being that girl, and watching her boyfriend go on Jimmy Kimmel and, you know, and be like this bro who, you know, who had the courage to break up with his longtime girlfriend. And she moves in with her sister, who is a sudden widow. And I had been wanting to write Kate's story in that book for a long time, to write about a woman who lost a husband she hadn't fully come to know, and being kind of stuck in this little time capsule of his house, his town, his family, when she had up and moved from Brooklyn, where she'd been so happy. And now she's stuck in this little posh town on the other side, over by the Hudson, and kind of lost herself, lost her partner, lost this love that she never expected to have. And so these two sisters, who are essentially strangers because of the age difference and all, they come together, and what they find out about each other surprises them, and I love that too. Like, I never knew you would be such a rock. I always thought it would be like our mom or our brother who would be there for me, but it's you. Or the kind of revelation that you have about your own family when sometimes you're in close quarters or a crisis happens and things shift.
Let's turn to one of your most recent bestsellers, Life and Other Inconveniences, which is set in another of your charming small towns. Was this based on a real life one?
This book was inspired by a visit to Stonington, Connecticut, which is a real town. I call it Stoningham in my book. And it was just like a day trip with my daughter and her friend and my husband. We went there for lunch, and I just thought, like, this town needs a book. It's so charming. It's so beautiful. And I wanted to write a multi-generational book. I wanted to write a book with an 85-year-old protagonist. So there are three protagonists in the book. There's Genevieve, who's 85, Emma, who's 35, and her daughter Riley, who is 16. And
Great age span.
yeah, right. So I wanted to write a book about like homecoming and forgiveness and loss and redemption, in that Emma and Genevieve have been estranged for 17 years for very good reasons. And is it too late now that Genevieve is facing the end of her life? Can she make things right given the person that she is, and what will that take? And it's a big story, there's a lot going on in that story about everyone who has suffered loss in this book, whether it's, her grandfather whose daughter committed suicide, or, Emma, whose baby daddy left her for someone else. Everybody has lost somebody, and it's shaped them in different ways, as we were talking about earlier. And for Genevieve, it really shuts her down, and all she has is her empire, her handbag empire. And again, that was really fun research.
Interesting. What is your advice, by the way, for aspiring authors on how to end a book?
I think it's important for us as authors to look at everything we mention has import in a book. And there's nothing that can be just thrown away. That's sloppy writing. I, as a writer, love getting to that point where I can wrap things up or reveal that element of the story. It takes me a long time to get to that point. I'm a big believer in revising and not just writing a first draft and hitting publish. So I try to make sure that everything I've mentioned is woven throughout the book and has that kind of resolution, so that my hope is that the reader will have an incredible book hangover and just like clutch the book to their chest and say, oh my God, I gotta just like sleep with the book against me for a couple nights before I can move on. And I think it's powerful. I think when authors do it, as a reader, when that happens, I'm so satisfied. And when it doesn't happen, I think they missed an opportunity. It would have been great if we could have seen who that little boy was, or something like that.
Please tell viewers about the heartfelt story that drives your most recent bestseller, Always Last to Know.
This is a book about everyone's family. we all have elements of this family. I think we have, parents who may need care in their old age, and we have changing roles of the children, and we have those old roles of the children that you can never quite shake, of you're the flaky one and you're the perfect one and I'm irritated with you, and it's funny, like, when you get together, you can be in your 50s and you're still having the same argument you had when you were 12. And so the Frosts are a fairly well-to-do family. Barb is a girl from, well, a woman from Minnesota, from essentially poverty and farm life, who eventually works her way up into working at a law firm where she meets John Frost, who is, in her eyes, the epitome of class and like East Coast wealth and all that. And they inherit his grandfather's house. And again, like, the town is a character in this book. It's the same town as Life and Other Inconveniences, but it's very different when you are, the queen of the town, like Genevieve was, or you are hoping to be a handmaiden in the town, and so Barb works so hard to matter, which says a lot about her childhood and her early days of marriage. And she has these two daughters, and one was everything she ever dreamed a daughter could be, and the other one was very different. And she was a lot older when she had her, and Sadie responded more to her dad and was daddy's girl. And then John, has a stroke, and Sadie has to leave her pretty easy life in New York and come back and kind of deal with the reality of her dad today, and maybe start respecting her sister a little bit more, and her mom. And also, there's a love story in it where she faces her first love, who has just become a father. And again, like, the message of a lot of my books is, families are incredibly important to the people we are today, but they're also our families of choice. And, you could get to keep reshaping your family throughout your life.
We love all your book titles. Have you ever fought a publisher over a title you wanted to keep that they wanted to change?
Yeah, I have. I had a title, The Next Best Thing, was a title that I felt very strongly about. And it's a line in the book where the male protagonist says about his brother, it's hard to always be the next best thing. And I just thought it had a double entendre to my heroine, who is a widow and struggling to get over her loss. The next best thing generally means not my first choice, but it could also be the next thing that's great. And so I fought for that title, and they let me have it.
You've won 2 Romantic Writers of America awards, among others. How important do you feel like those are for an aspiring author early on in their career in the grand scheme of things?
That was, now that you mention it, for best mainstream fiction. And then I had 2 romantic, the two of my earlier books won for best contemporary romance. Like, if you're Colson Whitehead and you've won 2 Pulitzers back to back, they're incredibly important. There are awards, and then there are awards. The Romance Writers of America Award gave me like one of 3 of the happiest nights of my life. The first time I won, it was my second book. I was a dark horse. No one had ever heard of me. It was utterly thrilling. And, to win again a couple of years later, and then again for a mainstream, it was wonderful. Is that award widely recognized outside of that group? No. And is it a problematic award in terms of the judging system? Yes, absolutely. When I was on the board of that organization, I tried to fix that so that there was less bias and that kind of thing. So for me, the awards let me wear a gown and let me carry around a shiny statue for a night. And, it was really thrilling. I don't know that it impacted my career. I was actually really hoping another author would win the last time I was up. They're really nice to have.
Please, before we go, tell us about your podcast. And I'm going to let you tell viewers the name because it's a little unique.
Okay, well, Crappy Friends, the podcast, it explores the complex world of female friendships, the good, the bad, the ugly. And this came about with one of my closest friends, Joss Day, who's also a writer. We've been friends for maybe 15 years more than. And she's watched my kids grow up, and they call her auntie, and she's at my house on Christmas every year and all that. And we went through an experience we were each dumped by a friend.
I've been there. That sucks.
It really, and I'm not taking away from your pain, Jake, but for women, it's devastating.
Is it?
It can be worse than, a divorce when someone who's really close to you leaves you. And so we both, neither of us had talked about it. And I remember like kind of admitting that I had been dumped by a friend, and it was so shocking, and yet it was for the best, because honestly, etc. So and then she said she had too, and then we were in a little circle of writing friends, and one of our friends just started to kind of spiral into this different person, and we just didn't know what to do, and no one wanted to talk about it because you don't want to gossip, and she's our friend and we're here for you, but we were way out of our depth. And finally, one day I said, like, I'm having some problems with this person. And so we started talking about the things we should have seen before, the red flags, the signs, like, why do we keep hanging out with this person? Is she really good for us? Our mental health? Do we have any common interests, or is it just habit? And we just became fascinated with the idea of, there's all these books about romantic relationships, how to get one, how to maintain one, how to get married, things you have to do, things you should never do, but there's nothing about friendship. And it's, and especially, the female friendship, the power that we have over each other's lives. So we decided that we would have a podcast. And we take letters from readers who send us in questions about, my friend is doing this, or I want to break up with this friend, or I can't seem to make friends. And Joss and I sit there and give our advice. If it's really problematic, we bring in our friend who's a psychologist and a therapist, and she takes over. And we say, like, we put in very little effort on it. It's real homespun. We're usually sitting at my kitchen table after dinner drinking wine, and yet it's really popular. It was featured in the New York Times.
Sounds like a great title for your next book. Looking back for a minute before we wrap up, any favorites off your bookshelf?
From my books, I think I would definitely pick Life and Other Inconveniences, because I think the themes of it were so big and so eternal, and I loved Genevieve so much. So I would pick that one. I think I'd pick My One and Only, because it's a reunion story of a marriage gone terribly wrong, and I love the setting. It's set in Martha's Vineyard and Glacier National Park in Montana, and involves a reluctant road trip between the exes. And then I think I would pick Good Luck with That.
You sustained such a wonderful career over the past 20 years. Any advice that you'd share, say in a classroom with aspiring writers who are hoping to build out the same framework for success?
The best advice that I can give, first of all, is ignore conventional wisdom. Ignore what you're hearing. Write what you want to write. Don't try to chase a trend or write a women's fiction book because they're selling now. It really has to come from the heart, and your readers can tell when it doesn't. So ignore, don't ever do this and always do that. Just do you. And then the other bit of advice is believe in yourself, because no one is born published, not even Stephen King. And also get over yourself, because just because you wrote a book doesn't mean the world should fall at your feet, and it doesn't mean you're going to get a big contract and movie deals and all that stuff. You wrote a book, you did your best on it, and at some point that has to be enough, and you have to stop thinking about like what you deserve or dream about. I would say, don't be afraid to stretch. You have a base and you know what you do well, but it doesn't have to be the only thing that you do.
How important is social media in your opinion?
I think social media is entertainment, and I'm happy to participate. I love the quick and easy way to connect with readers, even if you're just clicking the heart emoji on someone's
Sure.
comment. And I love sharing my personal life with my readers. My husband is quite internet famous, and my kids too. And I have nicknames for them, and my readers know, and that's really sweet and very intimate. So I do think it's necessary, unless you hate it. Don't do anything you hate. It's not for you.
In closing, if we do a reunion episode in 5 years, where would you like to have traveled yet that you haven't with Readers on the Page?
Someday, I don't know when, not anytime soon, but I want to write a horror story. I love Stephen King. He has robbed me of months of sleep. But what he does is what I think I also do. He grabs you emotionally. And the fact that he can make your heart pound in a sentence and never be able to look in the bathroom closet at night again, that's really powerful. So I'd love to be able to do that, because I love horror as a genre, and I love the idea of being able to scare somebody.
Kristan, it's been a true pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much again for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Okay, bye-bye.